All right, let's dive into this. The Porsche 911.
One of the most iconic sports cars out there.
Absolutely. And we've got a ton of great articles and encyclopedia entries about it.
Yeah, should give us a really good picture of how this legend evolved.
Definitely. I'm excited to trace its journey, all the innovations and cool facts, and share it with everyone.
It really is fascinating to see how it stayed true to itself over the decades.
Absolutely. So let's rewind all the way back. How did the 911 even come about?
Well, we have to go back to Ferry Porsche, son of Ferdinand, the founder,
Right.
early 60s. He's thinking about a successor to the 356, something with more oomph, more refinement, a real touring sports car.
I read about those early names, Type 7 and 901.
Type 7 was just an internal thing, but 901, yeah, that was supposed to be it.
What happened there?
Peugeot, they had a trademark on car names with a 0 in the middle.
Oh, wow.
Simple change, 0 to 1, and boom, 911 is born.
Crazy how such a small tweak created a name synonymous with, like, automotive excellence.
Yeah, it's wild.
But beyond the name, who were the key players making the 911 a reality?
Obviously, Ferry Porsche, he really shaped the car's direction. But then there was his son, Ferdinand Alexander Porsche, nicknamed Bootsy,
Ah, Bootsy.
the man behind the iconic design, that timeless look of the 911.
Bootsy one, you know exactly what it is, even after all these years.
Exactly. And then we have Erwin Commenda, brilliant body engineer, worked on the 356, even the Beetle, bringing that expertise to the 911. Can't forget Hans Tamala either, the engine guru.
Speaking of the engine, the rear engine layout, that was a bold move for a sports car back then.
It was.
What was Ferry Porsche's thinking there?
He was convinced that putting the engine in the back was the key to better weight distribution, better handling, better traction. Took some serious engineering, though.
And it gave the 911 that reputation for being a bit tricky to handle at its limits, right?
There's some truth to that, especially those early models. That rear weight bias could make it prone to oversteer, let's say. But in the right hands, it added to the thrill, that unique character. Of course, over the years, Porsche's engineers have refined it, made it more predictable.
But without completely losing its edge, I hope.
Oh, absolutely. That dynamism is still there, for sure.
Love that. Okay, so the engine itself. What was so special about the first 911 engine?
It was a 2-liter air-cooled flat six, a brand new design compared to the 356's 4-cylinder.
Makes sense.
Flat six, with those cylinders arranged horizontally, that became the 911 signature. Compact, lightweight, yet it punched out a respectable 130 horsepower.
Impressive for the time. I also read that Ferry Porsche was surprised by its potential, though.
Yeah, initially he thought 2 liters was plenty for the 911.
Okay.
Turned out that engine was like a hidden gem. Over time it grew, 2.2 liters, 2.4, then that legendary 2.7-liter Carrera RS.
The Carrera RS, a story for itself. But what strikes me is that they got so much power out of an air-cooled design. Wasn't that limiting?
Air cooling kept things simpler, lighter, compared to water cooling, which was the big thing back then. But keeping it cool, especially as power went up, that was the challenge.
Makes sense.
Porsche's engineers, they were the air cooling wizards. Bigger cooling fans, fin cylinders, eventually an oil cooler, all to keep things in check.
They really pushed the limits of that technology. Now let's talk about how the 911 itself evolved, the different generations.
This is where it gets even more interesting.
All right, guide me through it. What were the big changes, the defining features of each era?
Well, we start with the classic 911, from 63 to 73, the early 2-liter models, then the more powerful S variants, and of course the first Targa model, that removable roof panel and that distinctive roll bar.
The Targa, a bit of open-air driving, but with that coupe style. Still going strong today.
It is.
But then early 70s, big changes for the 911.
Big time. 73, Porsche introduces the G-Series, a whole new look, new tech. The big one, those impact bumpers, U.S. safety regs coming into play.
I've heard those didn't exactly win over the purists. Bit of a compromise, style-wise.
You could say that. But under the skin, the G-Series was a step up. Cagetronic fuel injection, replacing the older mechanical system, smoother running, better fuel efficiency. And maybe most importantly, this is when the legend of the 911 Turbo is born.
The turbo, that wide body, the whale tail spoiler, all that turbocharged power. What were the nuts and bolts of this game changer?
First turbo hits the scene in 74, a 3-liter turbocharged flat six, 260 horsepower, just insane. Top speed over 150 miles per hour, a proper rocket. Then in 77, they crank it up, a 3.3-liter with an intercooler, 300 horsepower.
It's amazing how they mastered turbocharging, especially back then when it was still pretty rare.
It was.
But with all that extra power, did it make that rear weight issue even worse?
It was a challenge, for sure. They widened the rear track on the turbos, gave it more stable stance, helped with the handling, bigger brakes, stiffer suspension, all to handle that performance.
So it wasn't just about brute force. They made sure it could handle it.
Absolutely fast, but also surprisingly composed.
I bet. All right, moving on. What about the 993? That came out in 94, right?
The 993, many consider it the last of the true 911s, the last with that air-cooled engine. And the design, just beautiful, those lines. It's aged so well.
It has. But looks aside, what were the big steps forward with the 993?
Probably the biggest was that all-new multi-link rear suspension.
Okay.
Porsche took what they learned from their 989 project, a car that never quite made it, and used it to transform the 911's handling. More predictable, more stable, way less of that oversteer you mentioned.
So they finally tamed that aspect that had always been there.
They did, in a way. The 993 was a joy to drive, performance, and poise, all in one package.
Great stuff. What else was new with the 993?
They kept refining that air-cooled flat six, 3.6 liters now, 272 horsepower in the base Carrera.
Yeah.
Then in 95, they dropped the turbocharged 993, first production 911 with twin turbochargers, 408 horsepower, one of the fastest cars of its time. And they brought back the Targa, this time with a sliding glass roof, no more removable panel.
A sliding glass roof. Clever way to keep that Targa look, but with a more refined feel.
Exactly.
But you said this was the last air-cooled 911. Why move away from it after all those years?
Emissions regulations, they were getting tougher, and people wanted even more performance. Air cooling, it had its limits.
Yeah.
To take the 911 into the 21st century, Porsche knew they had to go water-cooled. Big decision, a lot of purists weren't happy, thought it would change the 911's character.
Bold move. So what happened next? Water cooling. New era for the 911. What's in store?
That's a story for next time. But let's just say, the 911's journey, it was far from over.
All right, you've got me hooked. Can't wait to hear more.
So yeah, the 911 going water-cooled.
A big change, and you said it caused some controversy.
It did,
I
definitely.
mean, wasn't it just like a natural progression technology-wise?
You'd think so, but for a lot of 911 fans, that raw, air-cooled feel, that was part of the car's identity, you know?
I can see that. Certain sound, a certain, I don't know, vibe that goes away.
Exactly. And some folks felt that first water-cooled 911, the 996, had lost a bit of that special something. But it wasn't just nostalgia. There were real reasons for the change.
Like what?
Well, emissions, for one. Regulations were getting stricter, and water-cooled engines are just cleaner and more efficient. Plus, Porsche, they wanted to squeeze even more power out of the 911. Water cooling gives you more control over engine temps, which means you can push it further.
So necessary progress, even if some people weren't thrilled about it.
Exactly. And the 996, even with the water cooling, it was still a fantastic car. Brought a whole new level of performance refinement to the 911.
All right, let's talk about those improvements. What stood out with the 996?
The base 996 Carrera, 3.4-liter water-cooled flat six, 300 horsepower, a big jump from before.
Yeah.
First 911 with a 6-speed manual, too.
Nice.
Inside, more spacious, more modern design, though some said it wasn't as classic 911 as it could be.
Right, right.
And we saw the Targa make a comeback, that cool sliding glass roof.
Yeah, a really cool feature. What about other variants? You mentioned all-wheel drive.
The Carrera 4 and 4S, those brought even better grip, especially in tricky conditions.
Makes sense. And for the real enthusiasts, there was the GT3, right? What was the deal with that one?
The 996 GT3, stripped down, lightweight, all about performance, naturally aspirated 3.6-liter engine, straight from Porsche's racing program, 360 horsepower. A true driver's car, incredible handling.
Sounds like a blast. And of course, top of the line, the 996 Turbo. What kind of power are we talking about here?
Oh, the 996 Turbo was something else. Twin turbocharged 3.6-liter flat six, 420 horsepower, 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds, top speed over 190.
Wow, supercar territory.
It was.
So even with the water cooling change, the 996 kept pushing the 911 forward performance-wise.
It did. But then came the 997. That's where they really addressed some of the design criticisms of the 996.
Okay, like what?
Well, they brought back the classic bug-eye headlights, you know, those round ones.
Ah, yeah. Those were gone on the 996, right? Replaced with those teardrop-shaped ones?
Exactly. Small change, but it made a difference.
Yeah.
Showed that Porsche was listening to what people were saying.
Makes sense. What else changed with the 997?
Interior quality got a big bump, more refined, and there were some pretty big engine advancements, too.
Like what?
Base Carreras, you had a choice. 3.6-liter or 3.8-liter flat six, more power, more torque than the 996. But the really big news was the introduction of PDK, Porsche's dual-clutch gearbox.
I've heard good things about PDK. What makes it so special?
It's basically an automated manual, but it uses two clutches. While you're driving, it's already pre-selecting the next gear. Super fast gear changes, smooth acceleration.
So no more lag with the traditional manual.
Exactly. Revolutionized how the 911 drove. Still considered one of the best transmissions out there.
Wow. So the 997, new look, new tech, new levels of performance.
Yep. And they kept that wide range of variants, Carrera 4 and 4S, the GT3, and of course the Turbo.
I bet that Turbo was even more insane than the 996 Turbo.
You bet. 997 Turbo, coupe and cabriolet versions, twin turbocharged, 3.6-liter, 480 horsepower, 0 to 60 in 3.4 seconds, top speed 193 miles per hour.
Supercar territory for sure.
Absolutely. The 997 Turbo cemented its place as one of the top performance cars out there.
It's incredible to see how the 911 kept evolving, each generation building on the last. What about the 991, the one that came out in 2011? What were the big leaps forward with that one?
The 991, that was a big one. Completely new platform, longer wheelbase, wider track, redesigned chassis. It was more stable, more agile, just more refined all around.
Sounds like a complete overhaul. Anything else stand out with the 991?
Tons of new tech. They introduced the world's first 7-speed manual transmission.
7 speeds. Wow. What was the thinking behind that?
It wasn't just about adding another gear. It was about having a wider range of gear ratios. Better for performance, better for fuel economy. Porsche always pushing the envelope, you know?
Always innovating. What about the engines? Any big changes there?
Yep. New generation flat sixes, direct fuel injection, more efficient combustion, more power, better fuel economy, fewer emissions, the whole package.
Impressive.
And for those who wanted even more handling prowess, certain models got rear-wheel steering.
Real steering. That's pretty wild. How does that even work?
So at low speeds, the rear wheels turn a bit in the opposite direction of the front wheels. It's like shortening the wheelbase, makes the car super nimble in tight corners. But at higher speeds, the rear wheels turn with the front wheels, almost like extending the wheelbase, which makes it more stable.
So you get the best of both worlds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Really clever system. And the design of the 991, it was a beautiful evolution of the classic 911 look, more modern, more sculpted. Inside, it was all new too, really driver-focused.
The 991 sounds like it was a real turning point for the 911. But then came the 992, the current generation. How do you even improve on something that's already, so close to perfect?
That's the thing about the 911. It's a car that never stops evolving. The 992, it takes everything great about the 991 and refines it even further.
Okay, before we jump into the 992, let's talk about some of the special editions, the ones that become legends. Where should we start? Okay, special editions, the legendary 911s. I'm ready.
Well, you got to start with the 1973 Carrera RS. This is the one that really put the 911 on the map as a performance car.
That ducktail spoiler, it's just so cool.
It is. But it wasn't just about looks. The Carrera RS, it was a homologation special, built so Porsche could race it. They gave it a bigger engine, 2.7 liters, 210 horsepower. And it was way lighter than the standard 911, thinner glass, aluminum panels, stripped-down interior.
A real race car for the road.
Pretty much. And it was a hit. On the track and off. Today, it's one of the most sought-after 911s out there.
I can see why it's a legend. Any other special editions that come to mind?
So many to choose from. But the 1996 911 GT1, that one's special. This wasn't your everyday 911, though.
How so?
It was a full-blown race car built for the GT1 class at Le Mans. It was going up against the big boys, McLaren F1 GTR, Mercedes CLK GTR.
Serious competition.
No kidding.
Oh.
And to race it, Porsche had to build a few street-legal versions.
How many are we talking?
25. Basically, race cars with license plates. Mid-engine layout, carbon fiber body, twin turbocharged 3.6-liter flat six, over 500 horsepower.
That's insane.
It was.
They really took the 911 to the extreme with that one.
They did. And it shows how 911 wasn't just meant to be a road car. It was always meant to race. That's part of its DNA.
From those early days when people worried about that rear engine layout and the handling, to seeing how Porsche turned it into a strength.
It's pretty amazing, right?
Yeah.
They just kept refining it, the suspension, the aerodynamics, how the weight was balanced, until it became one of the best handling sports cars in the world.
It's not just about numbers, though, right? There's something special about driving a 911.
There is. It's that feeling of connection, that precision, knowing you're in control even when you're pushing it.
Yeah, you can't really put it into words.
Exactly.
We talked about all the different generations, but what about the different body styles? Coupe, Targa, convertible, do they feel different to drive?
They do. The coupe, it's the most rigid. You really feel connected to the road. The Targa, it's a nice compromise, open-air feeling, but still pretty stiff. And then the convertible, that's all about enjoying the wind in your hair, a bit less sporty maybe, but still a fantastic drive.
So many options, yet they all capture that 911 spirit.
That's the beauty of it.
As we wrap up, I keep thinking about how the car world is changing, electric cars, self-driving cars. What does that mean for a car like the 911?
Big question, right? The 911, it's always been about the thrill of driving. What happens when that changes?
Porsche's already shown with the Taycan that they can make an incredible electric sports car, but can you have an electric 911 without losing that essence?
I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what they do. But Porsche, they've always been innovators, always pushing boundaries. I think no matter what happens, the 911 will always be an icon.
I hope you're right. Well, everyone, that's our deep dive into the Porsche 911. Hope you enjoyed it.
And maybe it'll inspire you to get behind the wheel of a 911 someday.
Until next time, happy driving.